Hello, welcome to Quackalope, and today we're going to be diving into a little bit of a new format. We've done a few of these videos already, but we are touching on a right for you, wrong for you series, where as quickly and efficiently as possible, we let you know whether or not Too Many Bones is right for you or wrong for you. The way that we do this is we break down each game based on 6 kind of criteria or factors that we use when determining if a game is going to be added to our personal collection. Today we're diving into Too Many Bones by Chip Theory Games, and those 6 factors we're going to be evaluating it with are the mechanics, the theme, the accessibility, the gameplay, the modes of play, the innovation, and finally, the price point. So that by the end of this video, you can determine if this game is wrong for you or right for you. We will have timestamps in the description and the comment section of this video letting you jump to any one of those sections, but just to start off, let's go ahead and dive into the mechanics of this game. Very bare bones, basic approach. What is this game?
So this is a dice-based RPG. Essentially what you're doing is that you are building out your characters with a particular set of dice and then employing those dice in a very abstracted battle format. You'll do this throughout a very limited adventure depending on what type of villain you're trying to go out for. And there's all types of villains and mechanics that tie into that, but essentially you roll dice, you do damage, you take damage back, and you try to make it through the night.
Yeah, so if rolling dice and a RPG development-like system sounds like something you might be interested in,
this might be right for you.
This might be right for you. The next thing we're going to dive into is going to be the theme of this game, determining what the overall story, lore, or narrative of Way Too Many Bones is going to be. And if anyone's ever been to this channel, you know that theme is an aggressively important element of gameplay for me. The theme of this game is you're going to be a band of gearlocks who are sort of like hobbits in the Lord of the Rings series. Weak little creatures who don't usually get involved in big happening events in the rest of the world, but are innovative and creative enough that when they do or when they need to, they can really, take down their foe. They can cause some problems, and the land is being covered by a variety of potential baddies, and your gearlocks are really the last line of defense. So you decide that you're going to set forth. Whether you're playing Picket or Tantrum or Patches or Boomer or any of the expansion characters, you each have your own unique skill sets and abilities that add to the party's build as a whole. You set forth on this grand adventure, drawing story cards, walking through different encounters, unlocking gear, gaining items, and eventually having a giant showdown with a big bad boss at the end. Now, on one side, the lore is rich and compelling. The world feels alive in a simple and abstract format. That being said, there have been some complaints in terms of the replayability of the game, especially when it comes to just the core game as a whole. Can you touch on those just a little bit?
Yeah, so because of the linear format in the story, the only variation you're going to get is technically in the order of cards that appear, but essentially the big baddies are called tyrants in the game. They have a particular mechanic, and you'll essentially, once you learn how to game that tyrant, you'll pretty much know how to deal with them efficiently for the rest of your playthroughs.
And you can customize. That deck of cards is manipulated by which baddie you're facing or what decisions you make throughout the course of the game, but the long-term replayability of the game is not quite as exciting as the first few experiences you will have.
With that being said, Chip Theory has created a lot of variability through expansions and through other things, but in this particular video, we're just talking about the base game.
But it is important to know that if you like story-driven RPG-style games, and this one is a good one, a little bit more abstracted than some of your other ones, there is enough content both in the core game and in expansions that are available that you won't run out of things to do if you fall in love with the Too Many Bones world and you decide to play in it. Now, let's go ahead and swing into the accessibility of this game as a whole.
That's where things get a little bit trickier.
So we've sold you on the theme, we've sold you on the idea of the game. Are we able to teach it to them?
That is the ultimate question whenever playing with Too Many Bones and teaching this to new players. For example, games like Gloomhaven, Dungeon Crawlers, etc., they all have pretty high barriers of entry. Usually once you're in the door, you're not going to want to leave. And this is no exception to that. In essence, you're throwing dice, and those dice are resolved pretty straightforward. However, once you start incorporating what makes every gear lock unique, that's where the complexity becomes apparent.
Well, the start of most games usually involves actually handing someone a player sheet like this and sitting for about 15 minutes while they read it.
Popularized by Vast,
And
I
then,
think.
looking up at the person that's teaching them the game and saying, I'm still not quite sure what rage means versus rage, or what intimidate means versus cripple, or how all of these things will tie together and play. And the teacher of the game is usually like, okay, as long as you understand the core mechanics, we can swing into the game, we can start teaching you how to play, we'll get there, trust me, it'll unlock, it kind of progresses slowly. All that being said, this game has a cost to learn.
Yeah.
It does.
It's pretty high.
The rulebook is decent.
Yeah.
It is not a terrible read, but the best way to learn this game is going to be through experiencing and playing this game. And you're not going to really know how to master or utilize these gear locks until you played them once or twice in their own right, which matches up a little funny with the very first thing I said in lore. The first few experiences you have with the story of the game will be the best, but the more experiences you have with the gear locks themselves will make the game better to play.
Yep.
So, normally, what I would say is learn the game on the first scenario or two until you've mastered some of the mechanics, how things pair together, how your dice start to chain, and then dive into the expansive story, the bigger and badder villains, and some of the expansion content.
Yeah.
Teaching your friends how to play will be a little bit of a process. So,
But if they stick to it, they'll very likely have a great game to play in the future at your place.
yeah. So if you're not intimidated by a heavier barrier to entry when it comes to learning, and you're still intrigued by a dice-based RPG that genuinely has found its own little home in the board gamer community, this game still might be right for you. The next question that we're going to have to dive into then is the gameplay itself. What elements or mechanics of the gameplay really take a shine for you, whether that's making it right for you or wrong for you when it comes to bringing it home?
Too Many Bones, I think, is an excellent example of abstracting a genre and completely redoing it in a way that feels so very fresh and so very interesting. Yes, you're rolling dice, but the way that the dice are mitigated in the game is apparent from the very first die roll. So particularly, bones in this game are good. They're not bad. And you have a lot of agency when you're making these decisions and what dice you're going to roll. There's a lot of interconnected elements that determine what you decide to do.
It's very rare that a dice feels purposeless. And that's a neat thing for a dice roller. There's always something you can attach that resource to.
Yeah, and another thing is that even though the battle, every single battle is going to be contained on this neoprene mat, they all feel extremely challenging, to the point that even sometimes they feel a little bit impossible. And I think that's incredibly impressive when you're just working with chips and dice.
You know, this game does not hold its punches back.
No.
This game is a brutally challenging game if you're brand new to it. And I think that's something to either admire or scare you away.
Yes.
If you want a game that'll challenge you, this one will certainly do that, which is a good reason for replayability. One of the things that makes this possibly a wrong for me style game is actually this battle map itself. It's always on the same grid. It's always in the same structure. And while these battles are challenging, I do wish there was a little bit more variability when it came to the terrain and environment we were actually fighting on. The most interesting part of this game, and an element that might make it right for me, is the gearlock grid themselves. The game is less about these battles, even though the battles are the structure of the game, and more about how you upgrade, level up, and progress your gearlock systems that are going to be influencing or affecting these battles.
And one of the most important things and the reasons why you need to very effectively build up your gearlock is because these creatures, they all have particular traits and abilities that they're going to start employing as you progress. So you might start with something that's very basic that essentially just hits you back, and you might end up with a creature that flies to the heavens, drops down, attacks you, then leaves again, and then poisons everybody else around them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that can happen.
And the last thing I want to touch on when it comes to gameplay itself, while these are limited, while you're normally starting with the same kind of story event, at least day 1 and day 2, I do find these stories interesting. I am always kind of curious about experimenting or pushing kind of the limits or pushing my luck in some ways. So an important part for me when it comes to the gameplay of an RPG or a choose-your-own-adventure style game is going to be the narrative and the lore, and that for me gets a gold seal. So if that gameplay, if the elements that we personally hook onto didn't scare you away, this game still might be right for you. The question is going to come down to the modes of play. What does this play best at? What is this type of game really fit for in terms of a gaming group?
So I actually feel that this is one of those rare games that play well at any player count. You know, you usually have...
So this is a 1 to 4 player game.
Yeah.
60 to 90 minutes. And I think
that depends on how many players you have.
And it bills itself at about 12 plus, right? And you'd say that 1 to 4 player range is a true honest sale?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It depends on how difficult you want your encounters to be and how much you want the game to kind of like force you to think and be on your toes. When you're playing with 1 to 2 gear logs, it is extremely challenging to go through, and it's all about team composition at the beginning and managing effectively what dice you're bringing into the fray early on. However, when you start incorporating more players, there's a little bit more freedom. You can do things that are a little bit more wacky, maybe bring in characters that might not necessarily be perfect for each other, but still get to progress further in the game.
And when you're playing solo, there's some characters you probably shouldn't take out on solo missions.
Ever.
Their support style, and they just can't hold up. That being said, I don't think you're wrong. I do think the playing time increases significantly with more players. There's way more decisions being made. And on top of that, the scaling mechanic is based on the player count. So the difficulty level can really ratchet up significantly. But I wouldn't be scared to say that this plays reasonably well with 1 to 4. The question is, though, what you're actually going to be getting to the table. If you're a solo player, this is a compelling solo puzzle that you're figuring out. It is a challenging game that'll bring you back time and time again, just trying to defeat that last boss or that last mission. If you're a 3 to 4 player gaming group, this is a raucous, dice-rolling, chaotic mess of a game, which is less focused on the puzzle itself and probably more focused on just having a good time and making some really dumb decisions.
And if you prefer to play 2 players, get ready for an extremely challenging cooperative adventure.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. So, if that hasn't scared you away, or if one of those gaming groups fits into your current gaming group, this game
might be right for you.
It still might be right for you. The next thing we want to touch on is going to be innovation. Does this game do anything new from our perspective?
Yes, and yes.
Okay, apparently it does.
Yeah.
Well, that'll leave us with...
I think it does so many things that I've never even thought of possible within board gaming before. It's not necessarily that the things that are happening are incredibly mind-boggling, but it's the way that they combined all these disparate mechanics into a cohesive package that to me makes it very fresh and a very unique take.
What are some of those elements for you? Because I can say one for me that I haven't seen another game do this good, at least, is this dice building progression system. It is the most effective dice rolling mechanic I've ever experienced tied to a hero or a RPG style character. I really do get to develop this gear lock, and the breadth of options I have when I'm just building it up based on a pile of dice that I then get to take off my gear grid and roll is really satisfying in a way that I don't know of another game that does it like this. What are some of the other elements that you hook onto when it comes to this?
I am a huge fan of consolidated games. When you can give me a whole big box experience and something that's compact, I fall in love immediately.
Yeah.
And I feel that even though Too Many Bones is a gigantic box, when you actually put it on the table, it doesn't really take that much space.
It's smaller than you'd probably expect it to be, which is interesting because for me, this feels like a big box game. But I guess the footprint really is significantly smaller than what you would think. When I'm comparing it to my other big box games, the Kingdom Deaths, the Madaras, the Seventh Continent,
the
even sometimes.
Gloomhavens.
You know, the ones that kind of fit into that same category. I think that's a totally fair point. The other thing that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, now, this isn't the first time Chip Theory Games has aggressively overproduced something. Hoplomachus came before this, Cloudspire has now came after it. That being said, production quality, poker chips that feel nice and heavy and weighted, player mats that are entirely... I mean, I think Shut Up and Sit Down did a full review about how this is the only waterproof game they're aware of. Chip Theory Games, to a large degree, sets the gold standard when it comes to production quality and longevity of a game. I think a lot of people have been challenged by and inspired by the type of care and attention they put into their product. And I think it's worth, you know, every bit of resource and design that they've done. And so it is innovative in some of the gameplay mechanics. I think it is also substantially innovative in just the production quality and care alone.
The conception of the game itself is also innovative.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a game that will be unique on your shelf that probably the rest of your gaming library doesn't quite do exactly the same, this is one that will certainly stand out, and stand out for a variety of good reasons. Now, if you're still sticking with us, we're going to swing on to the kind of the final section of this game. I clearly already own it. So price for me was a remiss factor.
Yeah, it was a non-issue.
And I own every single expansion, the new Kickstarter that's coming out. In fact, I own all of Chip Theory Games. So you do have to take my feedback with that context in mind. I am a massive fan of this style of game and this game itself, enough to the point that I have purchased everything. But base game alone, what's the price we're looking at, and what are people getting in terms of the value that they're spending?
So one thing that Chip Theory Games does very well is listen. And as soon as the first base game came out, they knew they had something amazing in their hands, but they knew it was a little bit inaccessible for newer players, especially people that have never even heard of a concept like this. Like we said, things that are as innovative as Too Many Bones was aren't things that a lot of people tend to trust from the onset. So there are now options. For example, Undertow, which is a smaller version of the core game, is a much friendlier point of entry while giving a very similar breadth of experience.
So what you're saying is that since this core game has came out, there are now options to dive into the world and lore of Too Many Bones without maybe paying the price tag. Now, what is the price tag of the core game itself?
So the core game, the original, retails at around $120. Okay. While the Undertow expansion, I think, retails between $60 to $80.
But it is a more consolidated experience. You will have less bad guys to face, and I believe it's a two-player variant of the experience, a solo or two-player dive. So you will need to modify that with expansions or the core game itself in order to bring in more players. That being said, I think that's an excellent way to get started if you're interested or compelled. Question though, on this core game, with that expansion available, what would you recommend to people who have watched to this point and think that this game is right for them? Do they go for the core game? Do they start with the expansion? Do they start like I did with literally everything?
You're the exception, buddy.
Okay, I'm the exception to the rule.
So if you've checked most of the right for you boxes, this is definitely a game to get.
Yeah. I wouldn't be scared of it if you're sitting here thinking to yourself, that sounds perfect for me. That being said, if you're maybe checked 4 out of 6 of those items that we kind of went through, or you're a little concerned by some elements, the expansion, I think, is designed to be an entry point.
Yeah. There should be no fear in trying out this game if you're even curious about it. because the barrier of entry has now been lowered.
Been reduced. So I think the cohesive response from both of us is, if this game seems right for you, there's a good chance it is. If it seems wrong for you, there's a good chance it's also wrong for you. If you're thinking or curious about getting introduced to it and you don't have a way to kind of get it to the table at a friend's house and avoid that $120 price tag, the expansion that they've came out with as that entry point is probably the most compelling way to start into this franchise. But this core game, if you like that experience, is well worth the purchase in hindsight or down the road, sort of as a expansion to the intro game in itself. If you've watched to this point in the video, thanks so much for sticking around. We really appreciate you being here. Genuinely, you guys tuning in, leaving a comment, subscribing to these videos allow us to continue producing them and help us refine what we're doing. This series is designed around two ideas. First, what can we produce that allows us to cover a variety of games quickly? And second, what would we, specifically Jan, sit down and watch every time a video came out? And so Right For You, Wrong For You is kind of birthed from that concept, but the context that we have is our specific gaming group. So let us know what we hit on well, what you'd like to see in future installments of this series, how we can refine it to be right for you and your personal gaming group. Whatever you do though, remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games. We'll see you next time. Thank you.